Deception in Politics, the podcast that pulls back the curtain on the forces shaping our world from the shadows. This is where influence becomes a weapon, where corruption hides behind polished speech, and where the truth is often the first casualty. From chilling true crime cases to calculated political manipulation, we go beyond the headlines to expose the strategies, uncover the cover-ups, and connect the dots others refuse to see. Because behind every scandal, every secret deal, and every shocking revelation, there's always a trail of power, money, and deception. Our mission is simple: follow the money, question the narrative, and reveal the truths they hoped would stay buried. This podcast is dedicated to fearless conversations, bold investigation, and asking the questions others won't. If you're ready to challenge what you've been told and see the world through a sharper lens, you're in the right place. This is Power, Deception, and Politics. Let's begin. It started like so many Canadian scandals do, quietly, behind closed doors, with good intentions wrapped in progressive slogans and virtue-signaling press releases. But by early 2026, the Canadian Armed Forces, CAF, had become a pressure cooker of incompetence, cultural chaos, and institutional betrayal. Leaked documents from Lieutenant Colonel Mark Kieley at the Canadian Forces Leadership and Recruit School didn't just pull back the curtain, they ripped it off and set it on fire. Illiterate recruits struggling to read basic instructions. Permanent residents fresh off the plane clashing in ethnic factions. Instructors babysitting grown men who had never been expected to treat women as equals. Basic training pass rates cratering from a reliable 85% to a dismal 77%. And woven through it all, language barriers, fitness failures, mental health crises, and raw, seething cultural friction that threatened the very cohesion of the force meant to defend the nation. This wasn't an accident. This was the predictable, savage endpoint of years of Liberal policy failures under Justin Trudeau, a deliberate ideological experiment that sacrificed military readiness on the altar of mass immigration, diversity quotas, lowered standards, and anti-Canadian self-loathing. Let's walk through it step by step, like a true crime investigation, uncovering the bodies, metaphorical and otherwise, left in the wake of decisions made in Ottawa boardrooms far from the training fields of Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu. Canada's military was bleeding long before the 2024-2025 recruitment surge. Decades of chronic underfunding, aging equipment, and post-Afghanistan malaise had left the CAF hollowed out. Recruitment and retention were disasters. Between 2022 and 2025, the forces received roughly 192,000 applications, but managed to enlist only about 15,000, a pathetic 1 in 13 success rate. Attrition remained stubbornly high. The Auditor General's reports painted a picture of bureaucratic incompetence and broken pipelines. Enter the Trudeau Liberals, who had spent years prioritizing social justice initiatives, climate rhetoric, and unprecedented levels of immigration over defense. The CAF was told to reflect modern Canada, meaning it had to mirror the rapid demographic transformation driven by Liberal immigration policies that brought in hundreds of thousands of newcomers annually, often with minimal integration focus. Permanent residency pathways were expanded aggressively, including for French-speaking applicants from regions with lower education and literacy metrics in some cohorts. The military, desperate for bodies, was ordered to play along. In 2022, permanent residents were first allowed to join with restrictions. By late 2024, those restrictions were slashed. Security screenings softened, the old Canadian Forces aptitude test ditched in favor of a softer-scored employment form emphasizing education and experience, which many newcomers lacked in Canadian context, and medical mental health barriers lowered to accommodate more candidates, including those with anxiety or other conditions. This wasn't organic desperation. This was policy. Trudeau's government had flooded the country with immigration at record levels, over 1 million permanent residents and non-permanent residents in some peak years, while Canadian birth rates stagnated and youth showed little interest in khaki. Liberals framed it as diversity is our strength and representation. The result: a military suddenly awash in recruits who, in some French-language officer platoons, were 50–80% plus permanent residents or foreign-born, some in Canada for mere months. The stage was set for disaster. By January 2025, the new recruits poured into basic training. Lieutenant Colonel Kieley's internal report reads like a dispatch from a failing experiment. One French-language platoon stood out in horror, 83% non-citizens permanent residents. Many had arrived in Canada just 3 months earlier. Communication collapsed. Instructors faced candidates who couldn't speak fluent English or French. Drill and weapons handling faltered because some literally couldn't read the materials without assistance. Fitness test failure rates spiked 15% among permanent residents versus 8% for citizens. The overall basic training success rate plunged. Recourses doubled. Practical failures and academic shortfalls rose sharply. The Liberals' lowered barriers directly caused this. Dropping the aptitude test removed a key filter for cognitive and problem-solving ability. Relaxing medical standards let in more individuals already battling mental health issues, overwhelming the system as anxiety cases dramatically increased. The mass immigration pipeline, calibrated for volume over vetting, delivered recruits from cultural backgrounds where military hierarchy, gender integration, and basic literacy expectations clashed hard with Canadian Forces norms. Francophone immigration pushes, which heavily featured applicants from countries like Cameroon, amplified the French side breakdowns. Officials later admitted nearly 1,400 permanent residents were recruited in 1 year alone. Record recruitment highs were touted in press releases while internal memos screamed warning. This was Liberal policy in action. Prioritize demographic targets and short-term numbers over long-term capability. When the military warned that the model assumed 85% success with traditional Canadian recruits, Ottawa's response was effectively adapt or else. Instructors, many of them dedicated professionals, were left to manage the fallout. Here the story turns truly dark. Kieley's report details a platoon descending into constant infighting between cultural blocs. Cameroonian candidates against those from Côte d'Ivoire. Allegations of racism flying in every direction, candidates versus staff, candidate versus candidate. Older recruits from hierarchical cultures bristled at younger Canadian instructors. And then the gender dimension, raw and unfiltered. For many candidates, it is the first time that they have lived with members of a different sex, and for some, it is also the first time they have been expected to treat women as their peers. Lack of respect for female officers and peers became the top complaint in surveys. Inter-candidate cultural frustrations boiled over. This wasn't mere awkwardness. It was the inevitable collision of Trudeau-era policies that imported large numbers of people from societies with vastly different norms on gender, authority, and conflict resolution, then fast-tracked them into an institution requiring instant cohesion and trust. The Liberals' refusal to prioritize Canadian citizens or enforce stricter residency, language, and cultural acclimatization requirements created these fault lines. Instead of robust integration programs, the military got platitudes and an onboarding tool after the fact. French instructors openly questioned granting officer commissions to non-citizens. English-side platoons suffered low fitness and similar strains at lower percentages. The entire force was strained by the experiment. Broader Liberal legacies amplified the rot. Years of focusing on woke initiatives, diversity, equity, inclusion mandates, climate lectures, and sexual misconduct seminars, while equipment rusted and pay lagged, demoralized core personnel. The same government that pushed pride flags and reconciliation gestures now watched as basic military discipline eroded under cultural pressures they helped engineer. Sexual misconduct has plagued the CAF for decades, with external reviews documenting hostile environments, harassment, and assaults. The new influx added layers of cultural incompatibility on top of existing problems, even if the Kieley Report focused more on disrespect and friction than new criminal spikes. When the leak hit first via Juno News, the National Post, Globe and Mail defense officials scrambled. Commodore Pascal Belhumeur confirmed key details but insisted mechanisms worked. Bad actors were released, language rules tightened later, a 3-year residency added retroactively. They boasted of growing from 63,000 to over 68,000 personnel. It's absolutely worth it, one said. The military now represents Canadian society. Translation: Ottawa's immigration overhaul turned Canada into a high-volume arrival zone, so the forces had no choice but to lower the bar and hope for the best. This spin ignores the human and strategic cost. Instructors stretched thin, training quality diluted, cohesion fractured along ethnic and gender lines. A fighting force meant for high-intensity operations now grapples with basic literacy assistance and gender sensitivity 101. The Liberals caused this by treating the military as another diversity checkbox rather than a lethal institution. Their open border enthusiasm, combined with defunding and ideological capture, hollowed out the CAF from within. Canadian taxpayers and allies watching NATO commitments see a paper tiger, lots of bodies, questionable readiness. Trace it all back, and the causal chain is crystal clear. Liberal immigration policies created a demographic vacuum and supply of newcomers. Ideological commitment to rapid diversity without sufficient safeguards forced the military to adapt by dropping standards. Lowered aptitude, medical, and security gates let through recruits unprepared for the demands. The result: plummeting pass rates, illiterate and low literacy soldiers, ethnic blocs fighting, resistance to gender equality norms, and a training system in crisis. This isn't xenophobia. It's observable outcomes from policies that valued optics and volume over merit, integration, and national security. The Trudeau Liberals didn't just mismanage the military, they actively reshaped it in their image. Consequences be damned. From the early permanent resident openings to the 2024 slash and burn of requirements, every step weakened the institution. Canada now faces a force less Canadian, less cohesive, and less capable at a time of rising global threats. The leaked Kieley Report is the smoking gun, a damning indictment not of the recruits as individuals, but of the failed experiment imposed from above. The bodies aren't literal yet, but the damage is real: wasted training dollars, eroded morale, compromised readiness. Future inquiries will catalog the full toll. For now, the story stands as a cautionary true crime tale: how ideology betrayed a nation's defenders. The Liberals built this mess. Canadians will pay for it, potentially in blood if tested. The only path forward is reversal. Restore standards, prioritize citizens, enforce integration, and rebuild a military that puts lethality and loyalty first. Anything less is surrender. This saga isn't over. More leaks may surface. More platoons may fracture. But the lesson is etched in every failed drill and frustrated instructor. When politicians treat the military as a social engineering project instead of a sacred trust, the nation bleeds. Trudeau's Canada got exactly what its policies delivered: a surge of bodies at the cost of a fighting force. History will judge it harshly. And that brings us to the end of another episode of Power, Deception, and Politics. If today's conversation showed us anything, it's that the truth is rarely simple, and the real story is often hidden beneath layers of influence, power, and carefully crafted narratives. But the more we question, the more we uncover. Remember, follow the money, question the narrative, and never stop asking who benefits. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe, share it with someone who believes in truth over spin, and leave us a review so more people can discover the conversations that matter. This is Power, Deception, and Politics, where fearless storytelling and bold conversations take center stage. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep questioning.